So, we're going to be stirring this Manhattan. And this is something that I always like to bring up and discuss, just as sort of a general rule of thumb. At the end of the day, whatever your experiences that you enjoy the most is going to be the most important. The whole point of this is that you are enjoying what you're doing, what you're drinking, and that's it. So no hipster bartender can tell you that you're doing anything wrong because they don't taste what you taste and they don't have your preferences. That being said, there is actually a little bit of a method behind the madness between shaking and stirring and why we do one versus the other. So when you are shaking a cocktail, you are not only diluting that mixture, but you're also aerating it. So you're taking all these tiny little air bubbles and you're binding all of these ingredients together. So where that works really well is when the components of the cocktail are not all the same texture. So if you have your liquor and then you're also using citrus juice or cream or egg or things that are just very, very different texture-wise from alcohol, that's when you want to be shaking your cocktail. On the reverse of that, when you have your cocktails that are more spirit forward, where all the ingredients do tend to have the very similar textures, like your martinis, your Manhattans, Sazeracs, Old Fashions, what have you, that is when you do want to stir, because if you shake, it's actually going to do the opposite of what you want it to do. Those air bubbles are actually going to separate those ingredients that do have very similar textures. So Ian Fleming kind of led us a little bit wrong with James Bond's martini, but again, that being said, if you love your martini shaken so hard that there's little icebergs floating in it, you should drink it that way, because it's about you and nobody else. So, we are going to start building our Manhattan. To start off here, I have our mixing glass, and I'm going to do 2 dashes of our aromatic bitters. If you really like bitters, then you can do 3. It is definitely a potent flavor, but Angostura bitters are amazing. They're kind of the pinnacle as far as in the sea of thousands of bitters that are available these days. These ones are tried and true. They hold strong. We love them. They go in basically every drink. So they're a really nice mainstay to have. Our second ingredient is going to be our sweet vermouth. So I'm going to take an ounce, so 2 tablespoons of sweet vermouth, and I'm going to add that to our mixing glass. As Stephen mentioned before briefly, vermouth should always, 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 always be refrigerated. It is a wine. Vermouth is wine, and even though it is a fortified wine, it will last outside of the fridge for maybe a week. Inside of the fridge, it can last for up to 3 months. But when vermouth goes bad, it really doesn't taste good, and I think vermouth has such a bad reputation in a lot of corners of the country and the world because people have been drinking spoiled vermouth, which is such a devastating shame because vermouth is one of the most beautiful wines on earth. So refrigerate your vermouth. We should make t-shirts that say that. We'll let you guys know. So our last ingredient for this cocktail is going to be our whiskey, which is obviously very important. So I'm going to do a full 2 ounces of whiskey per cocktail. So that's 4 tablespoons, which is, it sounds so much, excuse me. Oh yes, it sounds so much more rude when you count it in tablespoons. So in our mixing glass, we have our 2 to 3 dashes of Angostura bitters. We have our ounce of sweet vermouth. We have our 2 ounces of whiskey. So this is when the timer starts. We're going to put in the ice. And because, again, we're going for consistency with these cocktails, dilution can create a variation on that consistency. So the moment the ice goes in is the moment the timer starts. I don't know what you're dealing with there. We are obviously using a rifled bar spoon. The whole idea behind stirring a cocktail, this is where a lot of our baby bartenders earn their stripes, is this technique. So basically what you want to do here is you want to keep the back of the bar spoon against the mixing glass at all times. So when you're doing this, it ensures that you can kind of maintain the highest rate of motion and get the liquid over the ice the most quickly without aerating it, without causing any sort of disturbances to the actual mixture. So when you get very good at this, you can do 2 and 3 at a time. My hands are very small, so I could only ever do 2. with each hand, but it's a fancy little trick, and it actually does make a difference. So we love our stirred cocktails for sure.
Two with each hand?
Yes, if you want to get fancy and have bar tricks for all your friends. It's actually simple once you actually get the feel down. It's kind of like learning how to shuffle a deck of cards and do the little bridge move. Kind of just takes a while to get that muscle memory, but it's a very impressive bar trick if you're interested in learning. So I'm going to drain this into a stemmed cocktail glass without ice. So we're serving this up. Obviously, the whole purpose behind stemmed glasses is that you can keep the mixture colder for longer because your hands don't have to be touching the actual outside of the glass. So anything that's served up is usually a cocktail that people are wanting to keep chilled for longer. So we didn't have this on your materials because this is optional, but I do like including an orange zest into a Manhattan. A lot of garnishes are just for marketing appeal to make the drink more Instagrammable and fabulous. But as far as citrus zest actually goes, it does have a hand in the ultimate flavor of the cocktail. So the whole idea behind citrus zest is that you're going to express the oils from the citrus peel onto the surface of the cocktail. So this really starts the experience of the drink before you take your first sip. You're entering into this beautiful aroma of citrus and beautiful sweet vermouth and whiskey and bitters. So the way that you want to do that, when we're peeling our citrus zest, we try to get as minimal of an amount of pith of the white part as possible. And what that does is it helps to ensure that you're not getting any unpleasant bitter flavors. So I've done an okay job here. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our citrus zest and we're going to put the skin side down over the top of the cocktail, and I'm gonna kind of fold it in half. And when you do that, you see all of these little oils just shoot out of it. They're sort of like citrus oil fireworks. And those are the oils being expressed onto the surface of the cocktail. Last, with the zest here, I'm going to take a little brush of it onto the rim of the glass, again, so you get this full bouquet of beautiful scents before the liquid even enters your mouth. You know, the whole idea behind making cocktails is, you know, obviously we definitely have our hands very much in wine world as well. We are wanting to make beautiful balanced drinks that replicate a stunning glass of wine where you have your front palate, your mid palate, your back palate, and everything just flows together in such beautiful harmony. So the orange really helps to do that with a Manhattan. So what I've done with my zest, if you want to do fancy little garnishes, I have rolled that up into a little kind of jelly roll and stuck that on the end of my brandied cherry pick. And that goes right in on top, and you have just made a Manhattan. Yay! They are really classic, really beautiful drinks. You know, there's something very much to be said for beauty and simplicity, and if you look at the cocktails that have really persevered over time and lasted, usually they have about 3 ingredients. So there is something to be said for the quality of the things that you're using and for these very tried and true ratios and flavor combinations. We say very often, you know, a new cocktail really hasn't been invented for probably close to a century, maybe a little less than that. Everything is just tried and true flavor ratios. And every new cocktail that every, you know, fancy little hipster bar in San Francisco or what have you, every cocktail that comes out on those menus are just sort of zhuzhes and variations off of these major categories and classes of cocktails. So Manhattan is really a take off of an old-fashioned cocktail, is sort of where it got its start and sort of the caliber and class of cocktail that it is. I'll go over this brief history very quickly because I think it's quite enchanting, actually. So all cocktails started off as punch. So punch is the grandfather of every cocktail, and punch was brought into presence by British sailors during the time of the East India Trading Company. So at that time, there was obviously no international or national or any at all kind of authority or board that was overseeing the quality of spirits being produced in any country or on a global level. So these British sailors would get rations, usually of rum, to likely try to make mutinies not happen very often, because there were some trying times, I'm sure, on many of those voyages. And oftentimes that rum was maybe a little stanky. Maybe it had some alcohols that we were supposed to cut out and didn't. So maybe it had some wet dog odors. Maybe it had a little bit of methanol in there that wasn't great, that smelled very chemical. So these sailors started to mix things with their rum rations. And obviously going through this route, they encountered all of these very exotic locations with a lot of exotic ingredients that they had never had before. So citrus was one of those ingredients. So punch itself is the Sanskrit word for 5. And all traditional punches have 5 ingredients. You have your base spirit, you have water for dilution, which we use ice for nowadays. You have your sweetening agent, usually sugar. You have your citrus, and then you have teas or spices of some kind. So punch was everything for many centuries. Punch was the main drink at every major political event, every coronation, every big wedding. Punch bowls were flowing. Punch was the original of everything. So we fast forward then to the American colonies. And so many people coming into the country and into the colonies from their own countries, in a lot of them in Europe. And people began to ask for single servings of the punches that were their favorites from back home, or a punch that they had heard about. And thus the cocktail was born. So started off in bulk, we came real tiny into single serving sizes. And actually there was a pretty prolific French travel writer and sort of bon vivant in the 1700s, the late 1700s, that mused that the cocktail was America's only true contribution to the global culinary world, which I'm totally fine with if that's what we get. So as we're moving forward here, and as we have more sailors coming in from more places, we're still in the colonies, we have these taverns, we're now selling single serving of punch. And so new ingredients obviously start to become available here too. We're in the New World. We have access to things from the Gulf of Mexico all of a sudden. We have access to all of these new things. So bartenders would start to put their spin on things, invent their own cocktails. This was a new thing. This was a whole world to discover. So as years went by, people started to ask for old-fashioned cocktails, which just meant spirit, sweetening agent, water, and bitters. None of that floofy stuff, basically. So that's where the name Old Fashioned comes from. And a Manhattan is sort of a zhuzh off of that. The Manhattan itself, its origins are fuzzy at best. Obviously, as you can imagine, many people claim to have invented every cocktail everywhere. But where we realize likely it did come from was the house drink at the Manhattan Club in New York in the 1870s to the 1890s. So the Manhattan Club was the Democratic response to the Union Club, and actually John Van Buren, son of the president, was the first president of the Manhattan Club, and this cocktail became very, very popular very quickly. And really the reason for that was vermouth was sweeping the world. Vermouth was this new, incredible, imported, is it a spirit? Is it a wine? We don't know. It tastes awesome. It was this new product that was coming in mainly from Italy. And so vermouth cocktails were just lighting on fire. They were everywhere. And because this obviously has quite a hefty amount of vermouth in it, that likely really added to its popularity along with its pretty famous origins. So that is the history of a Manhattan.